Hello and welcome to In Search of Purpose with Sal Hanvey. Welcome to this week's podcast, In Search of Purpose. I'm Sal Hanvey, and today on the show I have Dave Swift. How are you, Dave?
I'm very well, thank you. And you?
Yes, I'm good. I was just out in the garden there planting some tomatoes and spinach and seeding, germinating some beetroots and things like that because with this whole lockdown situation, I think it's maybe time to grow our own.
Yeah, be self-sufficient. I quite agree.
So tell me a bit about what it is that you do, Dave, because I've been wanting to get you onto the show now for a while. I know I haven't been doing many of these, but you know, obviously you're a dear friend and I haven't seen you in a couple of years now. A lot's changed since I saw you because obviously you're in England and I'm in Northern Ireland, and it's not just as easy to pop down the road, and especially with COVID-19 it's definitely not advisable to pop down the road. So tell me a bit about yourself, because obviously people who are watching and listening today will be quite interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. Well, I'm a professional musician. I've been a professional musician, I guess, for 40 years now. So I started to play a couple of instruments at school. I started with the trombone and then took up bass guitar and double bass. I didn't really want to be a musician. I hadn't got a clue what I wanted to be. Both my brothers played guitar when I was a kid, but nobody did it for a living in my family. So yeah, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen, but I left school and people heard me play and started to sort of pay me money to play music. And I thought, okay, I didn't expect this to happen. So pretty much since I've left school at 16, it's all I've done. My career has been a professional musician.
So did you go to school, learn bass, go through grading systems, or did it just sort of fumble upon it?
Now, I did that on trombone because I didn't start playing until I was 14, which is quite late by today's standards. So, I mean, the thing is, I'd fooled around on my brother's guitars when I was little, but they never really appealed to me. I thought it was kind of cool having older brothers who had guitars and who played them, but it wasn't really my thing. In fact, I was much more into sort of sports. It was the only time I ever got an A on my school report was in phys ed. Everything else, D's and D's, you know. So I thought if I was going to do anything, it was going to be as an athlete. But I was always interested in music because I sang in the school choir for every school I went to. I was in the choir, and I also sang in a church choir for about 8 years, which I absolutely loved. You know, so I love sort of music and singing. But it wasn't until I was 14 that I took up the trombone at school. I thought it was kind of fun. You get to miss an academic subject by having a trombone lesson each week. But I think the trombone teacher didn't want to take me on because he said you're too old at 14.
Okay.
Which I was. But I think, you know, he normally took on kids that were much younger. So anyway, he gave me a trombone. He said, "Come back in 2 weeks and let's see what you can do." And I fell in love with the instrument. So after 2 weeks, I came back and he had no choice. He took me on, and so I did grades on the trombone. So I'm a classically trained trombonist, but then we had an offshoot of the school band with some friends, and we wanted to play some different stuff, some more jazzy kind of pop stuff. So then we needed a bass player. I volunteered, got a bass, and I taught myself on bass guitar and double bass. I'm completely self-taught, but I'd already got that musical knowledge from being a classically trained trombone player, so I could read music and I understood harmony. So the trombone was a big help, you know, switching to bass for me.
I suppose though you're going obviously from a brass to a string, so for some people that's, you know, jumping a massive leap. You're not going from a trombone to a saxophone.
Well, yeah, it's very true. I mean, it's a completely sort of different instrument. Having said that, with a trombone there are similarities because, for a start, if you're playing double bass or fretless bass guitar, which has no markings on the fingerboard, you're completely using your ears and muscle memory. So on a trombone, you've got a slide, which there's also no position. There are positions, but they're not marked.
Yeah.
So the trombone is very similar to playing double bass in the fact that you've got to use your ears to find the pitches.
Okay, fair enough.
And also the trombone is written predominantly in bass clef, which double bass and bass guitar are. You know, so there's actually quite a few. There'd be less similarities if I was a trumpet player.
Well, that's interesting because I remember when I was at school, my teacher, because I had no grading of any instrument, and I said I really wanted to be a singer, you know, in the sense of, you know, it's an instrument. And they argued, they brought it to the panel, and then eventually they let me in, like they let you in at 14 to do your GCSEs, and I did, and I got it, and I got a B, you know, from my music, whereas the other three in the class, there was me and Vicky, and we were both music singers, but none of us were graded, and then there was three people in the class who were all graded instrument players from the age of 4. So I understand that kind of feeling of, you know, but you were playing an instrument going in at 14, that's brave.
Yeah, well, it's quite late on, but I think at that stage I was kind of quite desperate because, like I said, I wasn't a great academic at school. You know, I didn't really apply myself, and also the other thing was that a lot of the subjects that I chose were completely wrong. I was very my choices were terrible because for me I was into, I guess, the arts really. So I loved drawing and painting as a kid. I loved music. You know, I loved kind of film, so acting and all that kind of stuff. And we did all those subjects at my school, but all I could think about, as opposed to picking the things that I loved and I thought I'd be good at, I was picking things that how to get a job when I left school.
Yeah.
So I kind of thought things like woodwork and metalwork and technical drawing and all this other, which I had no aptitude for and didn't particularly like. But I picked them because I thought, because I didn't begin to imagine that I would have a job as a musician. That was so far ahead, you know. So yeah, so even music as an academic subject, I didn't even take that because I thought to myself, well, how is that going to help me, you know? So if someone would have said to me, look, it's possible to get a job as a musician, so study the things that you want to do. So I kind of messed up at school, really. I didn't make very good choices, but picking up the trombone was my salvation. Because if I hadn't gone to him that day, or if I'd have taken his advice, I'd have given up myself. Then my life could have turned out very differently, you know. So,
did you ever send him a letter and say, "Oh, you"?
Well, do you know what's interesting is that I've not seen my old trombone teacher pretty much since I left school, and I wasn't even sure if he was still with us. But somebody contacted me recently who actually knows him, and he's still around. So. I've got his email address, so I'd love to catch up with him because really he changed my life.
Well, yeah, it's definitely something that you should, you know, seek out to do once this is all settled down, you know, for sure.
For some commission for the last 40 years, on my career, he might try and work out a percentage of the money I owe him for his advice.
Exactly. So tell us a bit about how you progressed on then, and you know, you picked up the bass, and then what happened?
Well, again, my trombone teacher was quite important here because he was what's called a fixer around the West Midlands. I'm originally from Wolverhampton, and so a fixer is someone basically that he's hired by, you know, studios, theatres, whatever, to find musicians for certain things, and that's what he did with me. So he would call me up, and I would do like shows, you know, playing in the orchestra pit. I'd do adverts for TV, radio jingles, things like that. So he was quite important in getting me work earlier on. And then the thing is, the more you do, the more people you meet, and then it's really by word of mouth. A lot of the work I got was as soon as you do a gig or a session with some musicians, they take your number, and then the next time the same thing happens. So you know, we'd all used to have diaries with loads and loads of musicians' names in there. And we all used to call each other, so it was really by word of mouth, you know. But I did a lot of stuff in theatres, a lot of theatres around the West Midlands, in Birmingham especially. But then I started to work on cruise liners. That was kind of fun. So this was in the mid-80s when I was about 19 or 20. So I did the QE2, which went backwards and forwards from Southampton to New York. Then I did another ship, which was in the Caribbean. I did a world cruise on another ship. So this was all happening in my early 20s. So, you know, my mind just exploded with this because my family weren't people who travelled and went abroad or anything like that. So this was my first time in a lot of these countries. So and it's you know, it just expands your mind. So it's the culture that you discover, new culture, the food. you know, it was yeah, it was an amazing time on those ships, because I literally was traveling all over the world.
I can remember seeing a picture of you on a social media, and it was you in your fine glory with the bass in the 80s, and you were totally rocking it there, Dave.
I think people call it my Freddie Mercury period, because I did have hair. I had short, dark hair, and I did have a moustache as well.
A handlebar moustache now, let's just get it clear.
Yeah. I mean, I've got one now, but at least it's joined by the beard. But well, yeah, because my eldest brother had a moustache, and I just thought, wow, that's the way to go, you know, because my eldest brother was quite influential with me. Like a lot of, I've got two older brothers, but my eldest one, I remember him more at home because my other brother went away to university. But my eldest brother was quite influential in so many different ways, kind of thing, including having a moustache, you know. So, but yeah, that was a huge thing for me, doing those cruise ships. And you know, I mean, artistically, not so great, because you know, yeah, play very commercial music and background music and stuff like that. So it wasn't a very creative environment at all. But I think at that stage, I was much more interested in you know, seeing all of these countries, trying all this different food.
Yeah.
Which I never.
Kind of banging out the tunes every night, things that you didn't necessarily enjoy, but it, like, obviously you paid well and it gave you a life experience.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything was sort of paid for. But the great thing was, because there was more than one band on a lot of these ships, so all of us would get together in our spare time, and we'd be sort of jamming in the band room. So we get to play things for ourselves, you know. But really, when we were playing for the passengers, it was a lot of the time it's stuff that you wouldn't always choose to play. But again, it wasn't the point. It was just it was the travel and the broadening of the mind, which was important there, you know. So, but yeah, I did that, I guess, from 84 to 88. Most of them were crucial. And in between that, I'd still be doing gigs and I'd be doing sessions. But somebody once called me an industrial bass player, and I wasn't quite sure what they meant by that as being industrial. But I guess what it means is that was my job, and whatever I got asked to play, I would do it. So it didn't matter what style of music it was or what venue. That was my job, you know. So very industrious. And yeah, but I didn't really do much of that playing in bands. You know, the whole thing about traveling in a transit van up and down the motorway. I didn't really do much of that. You know, I was much more of a session player.
Yeah, you were a session player.
I think we're called.
Yeah, and then shortly after that, your life changed in the sense that what you're now doing has become a massive part of your life. And that was obviously joining as a bass player with Jools Holland and his Rhythm and Blues Orchestra. So when did that happen?
Well, the thing is, after the cruise ships, which I did my last one in '88, and I really wanted to. I know this sounds kind of weird because I was already a professional musician, but I'd never studied music academically, you know. So there was lots. I mean, I could read music, I could play all this kind of stuff, but there was still a lot about harmony and things like that I didn't know about. Because I'd never played the piano, which is a great instrument to study harmony on. So if you're just playing the bass or the trombone, they're not the best instruments to study that kind of thing. So I really wanted to go to America to study at a prestigious school called the Berklee School of Music, which is in Boston. Because I just thought, you know, I was very conscientious about my playing, and I wanted to improve. I wanted to be a lot better and more educated, really. So I applied for all the details, and it was just an absolute fortune to go and study there. It was just, you know, beyond my capabilities. So the next best thing I thought was to move to London. And I thought, at least when I'm in London, I knew there was a lot of players that I could study with. There's loads of people I could do private study. So yeah, so I moved to London at the end of 1988. And also I wanted to play more jazz as well, because that was my favorite music at the time. So I started doing mostly playing double bass at this stage. So I was doing lots of jazz gigs. And the one thing that struck me most about it was very fulfilling musically. But I found myself starving to death because of how badly the gigs paid. You know, unfortunately, you know, jazz gigs are notoriously poorly paid. It's a well-known thing. You know? But most people play jazz because they have to. You know,
It's
It
funny
enriched.
though how jazz, when you watch a movie and you hear different sorts of music, and then whenever you hear jazz music, it sort of reflects being affluent. It's always at these dinner parties and champagne
Yeah,
receptions, and you never get it in like a hip hop sort of a reggae dude's basement dive bar kind of thing. It's always like represented through money, and I actually didn't really realize that it was one of the most notoriously underpaid.
oh yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Well, I mean, there's a difference with, say, if you do like a jazz function, it's kind of slightly different because then you might be playing for a wedding.
Mm.
Then if you're playing jazz there, then you can get quite well paid for it. But I'm talking about like jazz venues, which it's really about the musicians fulfilling their own their own love of the music. Really, they love it so much that the pay is almost irrelevant. But that's the one thing I noticed most of all. I'm thinking this is great. I'm playing lots of jazz, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to play with improvising musicians. I wanted to play more creative music. And for me, I've always loved jazz, even when I was a little kid and, seeing it on TV and stuff. So this for me was, I was now suffering for my art. Okay. So I did this for a couple of years. And then the next thing, I started to work with a sax player who had the Jools Holland gig. And at that time, Jools had left his band Squeeze, which is the pop band he was in for quite a while. And he'd finally gone on to a solo career. And he'd already had other bass players. But at this stage, he wanted someone who played double bass as well as bass guitar, which at that time, not many people did. They either played one or the other.
Okay.
So the sax player came to me one day and said, "Look, Jools is looking for a new bass player. Do you want to audition for it?" And I knew Jools from being in Squeeze. I used to watch him on the Tube, the TV series with Paula Yates, the live music show from the 80s. So I said, "Sure, what the hell?" So I went to do an audition at Jools'
When was
studio.
this?
Where or when?
When?
When this was in 1991.
Right.
So I've been in London since '88, doing all the jazz gigs, being creative, being skint. So I did the audition with Jools, which involved Jools, the guitarist, and myself, and we played for about an hour at Jools' private studio. And it's funny, at the end of it, I didn't get. I think Jools enjoyed it, but I didn't get like a completely positive. It wasn't like, "Wow, that's amazing." It was. I think Jools said something to the effect that, "Oh, that's great, but we've got a lot of people to see." And I remember thinking that sounds a bit of like an elbow.
Kind of does, yeah.
Yeah. And so Jools and the guitarist went outside. And I'm packing up my double bass, and then I'm thinking to myself, "Well, this is fine because I'm actually really happy doing what I'm doing." And then Jools came back in and said, "Oh, to hell with it. You've got the gig. The gig's yours. We've got a tour like next month or something like that." And the next thing he drags out a carrier bag full of cassette tapes. And it was basically stuff from his live gigs. And he said, "If you can take these away and just learn as much as you can." But this was kind of unusual for me because prior to that, all of my work had been written music. So when I was on the cruise ships and doing theatre work, everything I played was actually written down
Yeah.
on paper, on notation sort of thing. And it's really easy if you can sight read. It means you can play the music instantly. You just look at it and you're done.
That's right.
I'd never been in a situation before where I'd just been given recordings and I had to listen to them and learn them from. So that was quite a big turning point for me and it was great because what it meant was my ears got a real good workout. Because I'd only read music before, so now I'm having to use my ears a lot more. So it was a challenge, but it was also a great benefit to me and my musicality. It was the next step that I had to do. So that was 1991, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
And now it's 2020, and it's almost, hold on, you have been playing almost 30 years with him.
That's correct. That's what I mean. The Jools gig is it's my main job, and it's what takes up most of my time. But the great thing is, if there's any gaps, we can go off and play with other people. Jools doesn't mind that, as long as it doesn't clash. I have to give all priority to Jools, but I can go off and do loads of other gigs in between it. But the Jools gig keeps me very busy, and there's a lot of there's a lot of great things about it. You know, we get to play with a lot of people that we couldn't have dreamt of playing with if we weren't.
Yeah. Name a couple of the people that you've enjoyed playing with the most, and a couple of experiences.
Well, it's probably because when I was growing up, a lot of the stuff I listened to, as well as jazz, I loved like funk music as well, like the Black American funk stuff. So I was always listening to Earth, Wind and Fire and Kool and the Gang and all of those bands. But the couple of people that stand out, I mean, Al Jarreau is one of my favorite jazz singers. He's just amazing, and I used to have loads of his albums. So when Jools said, you know, I need you to come and play bass with Al Jarreau on the TV show, and I couldn't believe it, because this guy was really one of my heroes. And,
wow, that must be amazing.
Well, I had all of his vinyl albums, you know, from back in the early 80s. And normally, when I play with these people, you can't be too much of a fanboy, because you've got to be professional when you play with them. But with Al, I couldn't resist it. So I took all my Al Jarreau albums the day I worked with him, said, Al, I hope you don't mind, but I'm such a big fan of yours. Would you sign all my albums with me? And there's one of them, I think it might be called Breaking Away. It was from 1981. And he's signing it, and he sort of put to Dave, he said, you do realize this has to be back in the museum before 5:30 today. Because he was like that. He was such a humble guy, you know, but he couldn't believe I had such an old recording of his, you know. But he was wonderful to work for. What an amazing guy. And the other person, I guess, was Shaka Khan. I'm a massive fan of hers. So she was great to work for. And we first played with her back in the mid-90s on a TV show that Chris Evans hosted called Don't Forget Your Toothbrush.
Brilliant, loved it.
Yeah, and it was kind of a wacky kind of game show type thing, wasn't it? But the Jools Holland band with a house band on the show. So every week we got to play with an artist. We got to play 2 songs with them, and Shaka was on there. So I think we did I'm Every Woman and Ain't Nobody. We did on there. And like I said, she's another person that I had all of her records. You know, so that was pretty. Those two probably are right at the top. And actually, more recently, I got to play with Paul Simon. Well, because my brothers used to be big Simon and Garfunkel fans, so I remember listening to him as a kid on their albums. And so when I got the call to play with him, that was pretty special as well. And particularly, the track he wanted to do was called Wristband, which is a track of his recent album, and it's a huge bass feature. It's really a vocal and bass duet.
Wow.
You know, with just a few hand claps from everybody else. So when we did it on Jools' TV show, normally I get put at the back because being my height, the producers and directors don't like me at the front because they reckon it spoils the look of the set. So they normally stick me at the back, but because the song was really a duet with me and Paul Simon, I got to stand next to him at the front of the stage.
I must check it out again, because I actually haven't seen that.
Oh yeah, well it was great for me because normally I never get a bass feature. Most of what I play with these people, I'm just serving the song. You know, I'm just doing most of the bass parts are very sort of simple, and they're not very flamboyant. But this one, it really is all about the bass on that track. So
it's brilliant. But how you're positioned on the Jools Holland show is that obviously you're behind to the left of Jools essentially. So because the vocalist is usually positioned next to him, you're in a lot of the shots regardless. And you know, don't undermine your potential with modesty now, Dave. I remember.
It's also quite useful being positioned there, because sometimes Jools will start to play a song that we're not familiar with or we haven't played for a long, long time. But because I do have knowledge of the piano keyboard, I mean, I'm not really a piano player, but I know where the notes are, I know what chords are. So where I'm positioned, I can see his hands on the keyboard. So even if I don't know the song, I can follow his hands and work out what the notes are and the chords are. So it's quite a good position. But yeah, those are the 3 big ones. Smokey Robinson was another one. He came on the show, and our guitarist couldn't do the session. Smokey Robinson wanted to do that song "Don't Know Why" that Norah Jones had a big hit with.
Yep.
Our guitarist couldn't do it, so Jools had to get a replacement guitarist for that, and he got Eric Clapton
As you
So
do.
yes, and so on that one song, I'm sitting there, you know, playing with Jools Gilson on drums, Eric Clapton on guitar, and Smokey Robinson on vocals, and I'm sitting there. It really doesn't get any better than this.
Was that
This
the
is
moment in your, and I'm sure you have plenty, I mean, we could talk all day long about all of this, but is there a particular moment in your career, or is that it, that you thought, wow, this is why I do what I do? You know, I ask people that. What is yours?
well, I think again, playing with the people I mentioned, Shaka Khan, Al Jarreau, definitely had that feeling. But
Yeah.
I think the one with Smokey Robinson and Eric Clapton was because I think it's because it's two people. It's not just the one person. It's
Yeah.
two living legends, and it was great as well because normally I play standing up with Jules, and Eric wanted to sit down, and he said to me, Dave, he said, you know, do you mind if I sit down? Would you like to sit down like next to me? And I was thrilled because I love playing sitting down too, but I never get a chance to do it, and it's actually much more relaxed.
Mm.
So so that was great. And the weird thing about that song that we did, this version of Don't Know Why, we normally we get there in the afternoon. We rehearse with just the musicians, and then the artist will come out, and then we'll rehearse the song with them. They'll sing along to it, and then you have a break, and then you record the show. But what happened is that we were told that Smokey Robertson was not going to make the rehearsal. It was something to do with he'd flown in from America, and I think his flight was either late or he couldn't make the rehearsal. So anyway, so Eric Clapton turns around to me and says, "So we're going to go and record this on TV. We're going to play it with no rehearsal with Smokey." And I said, "Looks that way, you know."
Oh,
And Eric was quite shocked about it. And I also said, "Listen, this happens, you know,
a lot.
sometimes this a thing." So yeah, so we didn't. So we rehearse it as a band. Then the show starts, and we're Jules is introducing him. And Smokey Robinson appears from nowhere, walks on, sings the song. We play it with him, and then when the song ends, Smokey comes over to me and Eric and just gives us a big hug and say, "Thanks, guys, that was beautiful." So that was the first time we met him.
Wow.
After we played the song, you know. So that was quite sort of hectic, really, because it was a live recording on TV. You know? But yeah, I think that's probably that was pretty special. I
Yeah,
think
you've
that was
definitely played with a lot of people. I mean, you could literally name 100, I'm sure, off the top of your head. When it comes to bass, I know obviously we're not here talking about fully about bass guitars, but I'm sure there are some people who are listening and watching wouldn't mind knowing what kind of basses you like the best, and you know, even just the brands of the best bass and double basses that you play. Would you like to just share a bit of that?
sure. Well, the thing is, I haven't actually owned that many double basses. I think I've only owned three or four. The first one was a very very sort of uh, cheap thing that my what is that? My dad went with me to buy it in a shop in Birmingham. The shop isn't there anymore, so I can talk about it. But we quickly realised it wasn't very good. So someone said, "Listen, for double basses, you need an older instrument. They're better." So about 6 months afterwards, I went back to the shop with my dad this time. I think my mum came with me the first time because I was still at school. And my dad came with me. We wanted to part exchange the bass for a better one. And the guy in the shop said, "Oh, certainly, I'd like to have a look." And we brought out the original bass. And the guy recoiled in horror. He went, "Oh, my goodness," said, "I couldn't possibly accept that bass in my shop." And my dad leaned over the counter and said, "Well, that's funny because you sold it to my wife 6 months ago." So
Crafty?
oh, we called him out, you know. So and he was terribly embarrassed about this. So he took us in the back room and you know bought out a much better instrument, which is like an old German instrument. Some of them don't always have names with double basses. Some of them were made and they just don't have a name associated with them. But I had about three after that, and the one that I've got now was made for me in southeast London, which is where I live. And it's a guy that normally did all my repairs, but he makes them as well. So I said, "Listen, I'd love to have a bass made by you. So can you?" So yeah, so the only double bass I've got now is made by this guy called Roger Dawson, who's a complete genius with those kind of instruments. So it's about 7 years old now. And the thing with double basses, it's like with violins and cellos, they get better with age. They have to be played. Whereas with bass guitars, it's less of an issue with them. They can sound pretty good from day one. So with basses, bass guitars, I probably own about 100 of them.
Flip.
You know, because I wasn't, because the thing is, I'm a collector. As a kid, I was a big collector of all sorts of things, bubblegum cards and posters and whatever. I'm a big horror movie. I love horror movies.
I totally want to talk a bit about that as well.
So I've always been into collecting stuff, and I'm a real hoarder. So, but I never thought I'd end up collecting basses. But when I got the Jools gig, because we were traveling all over the place, we were doing so much touring that I'd always go to the nearest music shop. And if there was something in there that I liked, whether I needed it or not, I would buy it. So next thing you know, I've got 100 basses. But yeah, so there's some Fenders in there. You know, there's I don't think I've got any Gibsons actually, but there's some very obscure things. I've got some. There's like Roland made some basses in the 80s, but about 5 or 6 years ago, I started to collect vintage Ibanez basses, which well, they used to be all made in Japan. I think now a lot of them are made in Indonesia. But I fell in love with these vintage Ibanez, which Sting used to use when he was in the Police. And Adam Clayton from U2 was a big Ibanez bass user as well back in the day. So I started to collect all these old instruments, which were amazing, and I loved them. And then Ibanez contacted me, and they sort of said, "Wow, we love the fact that you're using our vintage instruments. Would you like to use the modern day ones?" Oh, that's right. I think Jools and I had appeared on the front cover of a bass guitar magazine, and
Yeah.
I'm holding one of the vintage Ibanez basses that I love. And Ibanez had seen that, and they sort of said, "Well, would you be interested in trying the modern day ones?" And I said, "Well, I've not even thought about that." So I went to their headquarters in the UK, and I tried some of the newer instruments, and I really loved them. You know, and normally all my old basses are usually 4-stringed instruments. These new Ibanez are all 6-string basses. You know, they've just got they've got an extra low string and an extra high string on it. So I fell in love with them, so I started to use them, and so I became an official Ibanez endorser.
Brilliant.
I mean, I still use my other instruments, but I predominantly use Ibanez bass guitars.
That's
and I'm very happy.
I know you like it because I think I've seen that one on a magazine at one point. And you know, you do play a lot of bass, and then when you're standing up with your double bass, you know, you're higher, if not the same height as a double bass, which looks pretty cool as well. And then also you've played in the likes of Les Miserables and different bits and pieces. I can remember you telling me in the past, just sort of different West End shows and things.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first moved to London, because I'd already done a lot of theatre work, and the key thing for me moving to London was to do something different. I didn't want to repeat anything that I'd already done. So, you know, I'd done loads of theatre work. I'd done all the cruise ships. And I just thought to myself, you know, now I want to do something different. So that's the reason why, you know, I said that I wanted to play with more creative musicians in a more creative environment, which really is playing jazz and whatever. Actually, one of the first gigs I did when I came to London wasn't with jazz musicians. It was with some people who were second generation Irish. They were all from Birmingham, but they were doing a lot of Irish pubs in London, and it was just 2 guitars and a fiddle player. So and they sort of said, we want to start using a bass player. And my friend, who was the main lead singer, he told the other 2 that I knew all of these Irish tunes and all these jigs and reels, and I hadn't got a clue. But he wanted to get the gig, so he had to convince them that I already knew this stuff, and I hadn't got a clue at all. So that was baptism by fire.
Absolutely.
You know, doing these Irish pubs, playing all these songs. But
yeah,
again,
because obviously the bass needs to be plugged in to hear it, but yet a lot of Irish traditional music is played in a session on acoustic and unplugged. So that must have been a tough gig.
Yeah, exactly. But the key thing for me was, and it was great music and there were great people, but it was a different culture, and also having to learn stuff completely by ear. You know, nothing's written down. It's all they had to play it to me, and I had to listen to it and play it back. So it was really great training for me, and it was playing music I'd never played before. So that was quite a key thing. But yeah, with the theatre work, because the thing about London is most musicians got their mortgages by becoming West End show players. Yeah. In all the classic, you know, because it's the way you earn, I guess, regular money on as a musician if you come to London. You know, if you get a West End show that runs for a long time, it's as secure as having any day job.
Yeah.
In any. But again, I didn't really want to do that because I thought, because I'd already done theatre work. But if I come to London and do a couple, I'm going to get, I don't know what the equivalent is, you know, like typecast. You know, people are going to think, oh, you know, Dave's really good at playing West End shows. And I thought to myself, and if you get, if you, what's the word I'm trying to find? It's not get stuck with it, because that's not very nice. But, you know, if you get known for just being...
Yeah, if you're renowned.
Yeah, if you get known for being a West End player, then it's difficult to escape from that. You know, so I'd already made my mind up not to do that. Having said that, a friend of mine who was the bass player with Les Miserables, he and if you've got a show, you need to have several depths because they can't do it a single show. Even the regular guy needs a night off. So, but he called me up and said, Dave, you know, could you come and do some depths for me in Les Mis? And I said no. I knew I could do it. I knew I could play the music. That wasn't the issue. But again, I was worried about if I start doing this and other people know that I've done it, they're going to say, "Oh, can you come and do Chicago? Can you come and do whatever?" So I put it off for ages. I said, no. I said, I'm doing my thing. I'm playing jazz, whatever. Anyway, he kept on at me for ages, and eventually I sort of said, okay, great. So when you go in and do a West End show, you get the music in advance so you can study at home. But when you play your very first show, you have to have the musician there with you who you're replacing. So you call it babysitting. So because if it's your first time at playing the show and these other people have played it a million times, they sit there with you. And I guess what it is, in case you really mess up, and they can jump in there and rescue it. You know?
Yeah.
Once you've done that babysitting first gig, then if you get called to dep after that, then you just do it. So I probably depped on Les Mis for a year, on and off, and it was fine. And because it was something that I knew I could do easily, because I'd had that theatre training from before. But again, I just knew that I didn't want to get too involved.
And what year was that roughly?
You know, this would have been, I guess this was like late 90s.
Yeah, I think we met in 2000 and something. Like, I was living in Plymouth, and that's how we met. I was working in Plymouth Pavilions, and then, yeah, the rest's history. That was back in 2000 and I think 1 or something like that.
Yeah, it was Plymouth, wasn't it? I was trying to work out where it was, because I know you've been to a lot of gigs since that, but you're absolutely right, it was Plymouth.
Yeah, and it was 2001, and then I worked in Top of the Pops in the BBC, because I was at one of the hootenannies, and then met somebody who gave me the gig for working there, and then ended up working a bit and doing music research while I was down doing my broadcast journalism degree down in Plymouth. Well, it was actually Exeter University, but Plymouth, and that's how we met. And then years later, I ended up supporting Jools and you and the guys on the Irish leg of the UK and Irish tour. That was about 5 years ago, and I did. What, sorry?
Who knew?
Who knew? Exactly. That was about 5 years. I think 5 years ago now. Yeah, and I did the 3 gigs at the Irish ones of the UK ones. Now the years have just gone boom, 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 and I'm sure in many ways, like, you know, because of the whole COVID thing, you know, I suppose we'll have to touch on it a bit. It's happening. You know, obviously your summer tour this year has been cancelled. It just seems that it's 1 year after the other, and you're gigging again, you're touring again. So much has happened. But what's happening with regards to tours? Do you know yet?
Well, what's been happening is we've just been getting emails every other day from Jools' management saying this gig's cancelled, that gig's cancelled. I mean, no one's ever said to us that the whole of the summer has gone, but you know that it has really. I think they've just said to us there's definitely no gigs right up until June, but I can't imagine there'll be any after that. And our winter tour, which would normally start at the end of October and run to Christmas, I mean, there's every chance that that's not going to happen either.
I know.
Which is weird for us, because it'll be the first time that we've not toured in 30 years. But it's the same for a lot of people.
I know. But when you're so, you know, it's sort of like everyone's sore toe is their sore toe, you know. It's like your 30 years is your 30 years, and it's been broken, by a situation much greater than yourself. I suppose we just have to, do the best that we can. But you've been keeping yourself very busy this last couple of years, haven't you, Dave? Do you want to tell us a bit about what's been happening in your life?
Well, yeah, there was quite a big change in my life because I got married last August for the first time ever. So last year I was 55. So I got married for the first time at 55 to my beautiful wife Lucy.
Congratulations!
Thank you. But we already had a child. So we've got a son who's called Oscar, and he turned 3 in March. So we met 5 years ago. We fell in love very, very quickly, and we decided that we wanted to start a family quite fast. And I guess a lot of that had to do with my age, because Lucy's a lot younger than I am. So I think she just thought if we waited too long, she didn't want to wait until I was 60 before we actually started. So that's the reason why we jumped in there pretty quick. But it was great. It was lovely having Oscar at our wedding, really, because he looked very cute in his little waistcoat.
He's so beautiful. Honestly, you're a perfect wee family. It's just so lovely.
Thank goodness he looks like his mother.
I say definitely a combination.
Yeah, I mean, he is a very beautiful child, and up until January this year, he had hair down to his waist. He had the most amazing long hair, but he just kept getting in his way. I mean, he looked really cool. He looked like a real rock kid, but I think it was becoming too problematic. So we had it cut. So he looks like a regular boy now, but he's still very cute. But yeah, he turned 3 in March, but he's very boisterous now. So he used to have an afternoon nap, which he doesn't take anymore. So it's quite challenging keeping him amused and occupied. So even though, in this lockdown, you could argue you've got lots of time, but actually now his nursery is closed because he was going to nursery. It's a full-time job keeping a 3-year-old entertained, really. So and because he doesn't take a nap, we don't get a break from that. So, but it's great. It's lots of fun. But I feel a bit guilty with the fact because he was enjoying nursery so much, and of course with young children, it's important to have that interaction.
Yeah.
With other kids,
Hopefully it won't go on for too much longer, and if things go on for a bit longer in the regards not going out to like the likes of hairdressers and stuff, he may end up with his hair quite long again.
Yeah, I know. Well, it has. I mean, even though we did chop it all off and he had short back and sides, it's already sort of starting all over again. So I'm not going to go anywhere near it. But sort of Lucy might have to give him a trim. But yeah, it's in some ways it's good because when I'm touring, I'm away from them a lot. So this is really serious quality family time now. Having said that, I think all of us need, a bit of our own sort of space. So I'm sure when I go away on tour, Lucy thinks, "Oh wow, thank goodness he's gone."
No.
So yes, Oscar probably enjoys getting away from us going to nursery. Lucy enjoys it when I go on tour. It's all this stuff, but now we're all thrown together. It's a slightly different thing, but yeah, we try and make it work. Lucy and I, we sometimes take it in turns. One of us will take Oscar out for a walk to give the other person. And Lucy's a great singer herself. In fact, her career as a jazz singer was really taking off.
Oh wow!
Before this happened, I mean, we did an EP with her last year called "Sometimes I'm Happy," and it was really successful, and she was doing lots of gigs and just gaining traction as a professional jazz singer. And then all this happened just on the verge of her career really taking off. But
luckily she's young, so she's got lots of time, to get back on it, and maybe she can be writing. She in her spare time get writing.
Yeah, well, what she's actually doing now, she's teaching herself the piano. Because I said to her, when we do gigs, sometimes we do trio gigs. So, she'll be singing, we'll have a pianist and I'll be on double bass. But so a lot of the time she just does duo gigs with her and a piano player. There's not always the space for a bass player in some of the venues, or the budget doesn't go that far. But I said to her, I said, look, if you get some, because she was learning to play sax as well. She was doing really well on that and doing a grade. But I said, really, you want to learn to play the piano, because if you play the piano, it's a very self-contained instrument. you can actually do gigs on your own if you learn to play the piano. You can be backing yourself. So that's what she's been doing in any sort of spare time she has. We've got a digital piano at home, and she's been learning from the internet. Just looking at online, and she's doing really good. She sounds she can play piano better than I can. That's for sure. But I've also been learning to play the guitar. I still play the trombone, although I don't really get to use it that much. But I still keep my chops in with it. But last year I started to learn to play the guitar because it's something that I always wanted to do and just never found the time. And I just thought, well, if I can get some guitar skills as well, then again, if we Lucy and I can do more duo gigs, because you can't do like a whole gig for 2 hours with just voice and double bass or
No,
voice.
definitely not. I'm sure between the trombone and the bass and the guitar and the piano and I'm sure your neighbours love you.
We've just got to get Oscar on the drums. And then we're self-contained, No, the last instrument I'll be buying him, I can assure you.
Is he playing any instrument? Is he taking after you?
Well, he plays everything in the house. So if I've got the guitar on my lap, he'll come along and strum the strings, or if I'm playing bass guitar, and if I've got the double bass, it's a bit physical for him, but he'll certainly hit the strings. And with my trombone, if I sit there and blow into it, and he'll grab the slide in front of me, and he'll pull the slide in and out.
Oh.
And he'll say,
oh, wee honey. And then amongst all these instruments that you are surrounded by, you're also surrounded by a lot of toys, because you have a lovely fascination and I would say almost like a bit of an addiction, Dave, to the likes of your monsters and bits and pieces. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, the thing is, my love of sort of monsters, horror movies, sci-fi movies, that's like, it almost goes back. What it does, it goes back further than my love of music, I think. And the first thing I ever remember seeing as a kid on TV was an American sitcom called The Munsters.
Brilliant.
There was the Addams Family as well, but I don't remember seeing the Addams Family as a kid, but I remember seeing The Munsters. And of course, it's the family of misfits. The father looks like the Frankenstein monster, the granddad's supposed to be Dracula, all that kind of thing. I think that the son is half vampire, half werewolf. I don't know how that works, but that's the first time I saw as a kid, and I just fell in love with the whole gothic horror thing, So, but of course, The Munsters was a parody of the earlier black and white Universal films. So when I started to watch those things like Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and I just loved all that stuff. And they had a set of models when I was a kid made by Aurora of all those classic monsters. You had to glue them together and paint them, and they glowed in the dark. But yeah, my bedroom, I shared a bedroom with one of my brothers, but I don't remember him being there that much. But basically, my room looked like Halloween every single day. I always had pictures of werewolves on there and skulls hanging down. But yeah, I just love those movies. I just don't know. I don't know why it was, but yeah, it's anything to do with and science fiction, fantasy stuff. I loved all the Planet of the Apes, the movies and TV shows and stuff. And I was a big Marvel comic reader as well. I've still got all my Marvel comics. And the Incredible Hulk was always my favorite. I guess because when you're a scrawny little kid and you're seeing this big green giant with all these muscles, and you're a little boy and you want to think, oh, I want those muscles as well, So. Well,
I actually, weirdly enough, when I was 1 year old, my mum has a picture of me in the cot going like this, like trying to get out of the cot. And apparently I was obsessed by the Incredible Hulk, and I thought I was the Incredible Hulk, a 1 year old girl trying to get out of her cot thinking she was the Incredible Hulk. So we do share that one definitely in common.
Well, I've definitely got a lot of memorabilia from that stuff. So yeah, my collection is things like models, action figures, posters, masks, anything to do with all of those characters. And one of my closest friends, and we first met, I think, about 7 or 8 years ago, and I absolutely adore her. And her name's Sarah Karloff.
Yes.
And, she's the daughter of the legendary horror actor Boris Karloff, who played the original Frankenstein monster in the first three. So he was kind of he was almost my childhood hero, because when I was a kid, I was so obsessed with that monster, the way he looked, and I was always kind of sticking bolts on the side of my neck and drawing scars on my face, painting my face green and stuff like that. So when I got to meet her, that was an incredible treat for me. But I didn't realize that we were going to become such good friends. So when I met her at a book signing in London, she asked me what I did, and I said I'm a professional musician, and she asked me what I played, and she became fascinated. She's a big music fan, so she gave me her email address, and we kept in touch. So what happens now is if Sarah Karloff comes to the UK, we always meet up and we hang out. And if I go to America, we'll do the same thing. In fact, we went to this very cool horror exhibition, or horror, yeah, I suppose it's called that. You know, the guitarist with Metallica is called Kirk Hammett.
Yeah.
And Kirk is also an enormous horror sci-fi movie fan, you know. So we love all the same movies, but of course Kirk's collection is slightly more sophisticated than mine. So he's actually got clothing that people wore in the original black and white films. He's got clothes that Lugosi wore, Boris Karloff, and he's got props from the actual movies. Whereas my stuff is much more from my childhood, you know, with action figures, whatever. But he's got the real McCoy, and he's got movie posters that are worth millions, original posters. So Sarah Karloff contacted me, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago, and she said, look, Kirk's having his own private exhibition of all his collections, and it's in San Francisco. And she said, would you like to come as my chaperone type thing? And I said, and I was on that plane, I couldn't get on the plane.
I am sure you were.
So yeah, we flew to San Francisco, met Sarah, and for the next 4 days, we just hung out with Kirk Hammett. And it was in a hotel in San Francisco. And just getting to see his collection. I mean, talk about a kid in the sweet shop, you know.
I'm sure.
It was just the best thing ever. And then I also got to meet, you know, Bela Lugosi, who famously played Dracula in the early films. I got to meet Bela Lugosi's son, who was there. Obviously, a very old man now, but and I also got to meet the Chaney family. So Lon Chaney Sr. played the Phantom of the Opera in the original films. Lon Chaney Jr. played the Wolfman. So this is the great grandson. So yeah, that's part. And I had a photograph taken with all three of them, and this is like horror royalty, you know. And this for me was more exciting than probably any musical thing I'd ever done, because it's again my love of the horror sci-fi genre is lifelong. More than, you know, the music came a little bit later. So yeah, I love all that stuff, you know. I did get a bit collecting the memorabilia, but you know.
Yeah, I've seen some of it, and that was a good years ago. So I'm sure the walls are going to cave in, and attics and all the rest of it.
My only vice. It's my only vice. But yeah, I mean, I'm not so active collecting that stuff anymore. But I still love watching the movies. You know, they're still very dear to my heart. Because yeah, it was my childhood. And the thing is, actually, when I started to collect, I had the stuff as a kid, and it all got, when you got older, you forget about it, and it all got thrown away. But I started to collect it again in the mid-90s because of there's a couple of little traumatic things that happened. Yeah, I lost my dad in the early 90s, and I got quite ill. I was in hospital for 3 months having some operations. Everything's fine now. But I think when I came out of hospital, because you know I was pretty low about those two things, and I went back to my mom's house in my hometown of Wolverhampton, and I actually found a couple of my old comics and magazines that had survived my dad throwing them out when I was a teenager, and I just became full of nostalgia again. You know, I was reading comics that I had when I was 10 years old, and it just brought so many memories back of my dad being around and me being healthier, because up until that point, being a very, very healthy individual, I'd been very good at sports. And all of a sudden, at 29, I was rushed to hospital to have these operations. So it was so traumatic. So yeah, the finding a couple of my old magazines was the best therapy I could have had. It was so cathartic for me. But then I started to collect all over again. You know, I started to go back to, you know, memorabilia fairs and thinking, oh, I had that as a kid. I had that as a kid. And that was the idea. It was collecting stuff from my childhood, because it reminded me of happier, innocent, halcyon times, I guess.
Well, I actually didn't realize that was. I knew that you had a love for, you know, for all that stuff. I didn't actually know that that was the reason, you know, because my album that I made, Nostalgia Queen, is specifically for the very reason of nostalgia. I was, and probably still am, the queen of nostalgia. So I completely, completely
I'm glad
understand.
I'm alone on that one, because yeah, people say to me, Dave, you live an awful lot in the past, you know. But I said, well, there's a lot of wonderful things happening there, and actually, my mum passed away pretty much the same time we had Oscar. So
Yeah.
she knew that Lucy was pregnant, and she knew we were having a child, but she was in a care home at the time and just very frail, very, very frail. And when we had Oscar, the idea was we were going to go and take her to mom, and we were going to let her hold him. But what happened is that Lucy was recovering from the pregnancy, so we just thought, you know, we'll do it in our own time, and we didn't know that anything was going to happen. We thought we had plenty of time. And then, unfortunately, before we travelled back to my hometown, we got the phone call saying my mum had passed away. So she saw pictures of him, and she knew Lucy was pregnant, but she didn't physically sort of see him, which was a bit of a shame. But then after that, we had to sell the family home because where we all grew up. So there's only me and my two brothers, and that was kind of weird, letting something go and it was the only home that we had. We didn't move around. We didn't have multiple homes. That home in Wolverhampton was where everything happened for me. You know, all my experiences with that, and so actually letting it go was a weird thing. But you know, it had to happen. But yeah, it was tough saying goodbye to it. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure, cutting the ties off. But it's funny, you know, how life sometimes happens like that. Whenever there's one loss and one tie that's broken, and then obviously there's new bonds which are tied, which is obviously with Lucy and your new son.
Absolutely, yeah. It's and it was weird because at my mum's funeral, it was interesting because when we went back to Wolverhampton for it, and we had it in the church where I used to sing in the choir, and my brothers used to sing in the choir before me. And I think my mum was confirmed in the church, and my mum was married there. My older brother was too. So it's the closest thing we had to not as though we're big religious people, but I guess it's the closest thing to having a family church. But and obviously it was very sad, the funeral, but Lucy was there with me, and we had Oscar in like a little basket. And I was thinking about during the funeral, I was thinking about the loss of my mom and how much I was going to miss her. But then every time I thought that, I'd look down at Oscar and be so aware. I think to myself, well, actually, she's in him.
I know.
You know what I mean? She exists in him, so it's not as though she's completely gone forever. You know, so that was a big help for me, a big comfort, having him there, because I thought to myself, well, he represents her too. There's part of her in him. So that
was a magical moment. You know, I really, really enjoyed chatting with you today, Dave. It's been great fun catching up. It's been quite a while, and you know, I would just like to leave on the note of saying, you know, when this is all over and things go back to semi-normality with the COVID and so on, what's the number one thing that you're looking forward to doing most outside of the home?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it's going to probably be playing, you know, being back out on the road again, because, like I said, what we're doing with the family is, you know, we're spending a lot of time together. We're not. I guess the only difference is maybe we're not going on as many walks as we used to, kind of thing. You know, we're staying in the garden a lot more, but that will be fun. That will be nice to take Oscar to the park a bit more and to be a bit more carefree about it all. But yeah, I guess certainly, you know, being back on the road, being back touring, because that's what I've always done. That's what I've done my whole life, and for that to have come to such a grinding halt, you know, I think that's going to be a big key thing, getting back out there and playing.
Back out there. Well, I hope that is sooner rather than later, because you do a very, very good job of playing bass, no matter who you're with or where you are. Thanks again, Dave, for joining us, and I really appreciate the time that you spent. Cheers.
Big pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.